Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is a repeat presentation of the in-person training we conducted a few weeks ago, as well as a repeat of the webinar we conducted yesterday. So we are just offering the same information multiple times. If you have participated in the in-person training or if you participated yesterday, you will not receive any new information today. So feel free to save time and if you've heard this already, you don't need to continue. But if this is new to you, we welcome you and are glad you're here. We have a lot of information to share for you about the end-of-year data collection for special education. And hopefully you'll be well prepared at the end of this presentation to submit your data on time and accurately for this school year. Okay. So why do we collect this data? We are required federally to collect certain data elements. We are judged as a state. All states are judged on this data. So we have to submit it timely, accurate, and complete. We have to submit certain data elements, and in order to submit that data, we need you to submit your data. So we gather that from districts in various ways and then report that federally. By mandate, we must also ensure that districts are compliant with their own data. So we have to check timeliness, accuracy, and completeness for you all also. That's why we have that in our determinations and DDPs and other things like that. So all of this comes from IDEA and the Office of Special Education Programs. So if you have questions about that, we are happy to answer those. But the most important part is that timely, accurate, and complete district data is good for the state of Oklahoma and good for you because it ensures that we're all on the same page and doing what we're supposed to do. Okay, so a few critical deadlines. We will pull data from EdPlan on July 1, late in the day. So that means you have to have your data into EdPlan, all clean, all submitted by 9 a.m. on July 1. For those of you familiar with advanced reporting, we pull reports from advanced reporting, and those reports take a while to fill. So once you enter data into your EdPlan system, it takes a good number of hours to pull over into advanced reporting, and that's why you have to have it ready by 9 a.m. on July 1. The federal deadline is July 30th, but since July 30th is a Sunday this year, we are pulling data on the 1st. Superintendents will be able to certify starting July 2nd through July 16th. So mark that window on your calendars. They will not be able to certify prior to July 2nd because you can't certify data that hasn't been finalized, and it won't be finalized until July 1. So make sure that they are available between that window. If certification does not happen by July 16th, you will be marked as untimely for end-of-year data submissions. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but to be marked timely on your determinations for end-of-year data, you have to have several things done. You have to have your certification done by July 16th. You have to have your district summary data page submitted by July 1, and you have to have any Excel documentation, required data submissions, student-level data submissions to us by July 1. So everything needs to be submitted to us by then. So we'll talk through a lot of that to ensure that you have everything ready. So the topics we will cover today include two main data sources. The first data source is the district summary data page in EdPlan. That contains data that you submit directly to us. So that covers the 45-day timeline. Some people call that child find. The early childhood transition data from Part C to Part B. It covers CEIS participation information that we are required to collect, and it covers the personnel data that we collect. So you give that data to us. We do not have reports in EdPlan to pull that data directly from your systems yet. We are working on some of that, but for now, that data must be submitted by you to us. The second set of data, the second source of data, is the student level in your EdPlan system, and we pull information directly from student records. So we pull exiting information, secondary transition, compliance, early childhood outcomes, and discipline straight out of student records. So if you have not reviewed those and ensured that they are clean and correct, then what we pull on July 1 is what we believe to be accurate and complete. And if it's not accurate and complete, there won't be much of a window for you to clean up. You will be held accountable for that data. So make sure it is correct and that you have reviewed it to make sure that it reflects your district well. We will also talk a little bit about certification, and then very, very briefly, I will give you a couple of slides on accessing advanced reports so that you can see the reports that we use and which reports we will reference throughout the data collection period. Okay, so a few notes about data quality before we get started. In order to make sure that your data is as clean and accurate as possible, we need you to do a few things. The first of these is to update your contact information in the LEA agreements. So every May, June, I think it opens in April actually, districts are required to complete the LEA assurances and agreement in the grants management system. This is may or may not be something that you do directly. Often it's the superintendent does this or another administrator does it. But that documentation needs to be completed, and in the LEA agreement there's a section where we collect contact information on superintendents, finance officers, and the special education director. So if this past year you were not receiving emails from us when we sent out the determinations and other things like that, maybe you haven't been getting notifications on certain things, it's probably because your contact information in the LEA agreement is not correct. So make sure you go in there, talk to whoever updates that. There are districts this year that haven't had corrected information in 10 years. So it references someone who hasn't worked in the district even in a long time. So because we have to pull new contact information every year from districts, this is the only place where we have confirmed consistent information about special education directors. So we need you to make sure that your information in there is correct. Your emails are correct, your names are spelled correctly, all of that. If you have questions about where that is in the system, let us know. We can help you find that. Also, if you have site changes in your district, maybe you're adding a site or you're taking away some sites. We know that there are some district changes at the site level that happen every year. Make sure your site codes are correct in EdPlan. So if your grade span changes, or if you have a new location where you will be educating students, make sure you add that site and you update your site codes. Activating Sooner Start referral records. So this past year, about 92% of all Sooner Start records that were sent to districts, they were sent digitally. And as you probably know, records that are sent from Sooner Start show up in a district's inactive records. In order for teachers, related services providers, psychologists to see those records, most of the time, depending on the role of that person, they cannot see inactive records. So you have to activate the records to make sure that they are reviewed. So please do that. Only about 60% of Sooner Start referrals were ever activated in the district. And it's important that you look at those, review those on the way to the transition conference meetings, the transition planning conferences. So do that so that we can make sure we get our Sooner Start referrals entered correctly. Now there are a couple things, exit codes. Make sure your exit codes are correct. If you have an unknown exit code, you need to, that should be used as a temporary code. You need to make sure that that is updated. It's fairly easy to update those. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but you do need to change those. If you don't change an unknown exit code, exit reason, then it will be counted as a dropout, and you don't want those counted as dropouts if you know where the student went. Similarly, if you are missing an exit reason in the student history or on one of the exit reports, it's likely because you have duplicated exits and reentry events in a child's student history. So you need to go look at the student history and delete any duplicate exits and reentries if you are missing the exit reason for that student. So we can walk you through that the first couple of times to make sure it makes sense and that you're doing it correctly, not deleting events that shouldn't be deleted. Fortunately, every deleted event is actually, it's more like inactivated. It just goes down to the bottom of the student history, so it's still listed in the student's information. It just happens to not pull to reports any longer. Similarly, event timelines on the student history. If you have parent consents that follow eligibility, or if you have your eligibility, your REDs and MEGs finalized after the IEP, it will throw off your timelines because we pull that information from saved event dates from student history. And if those are not correct, then you will, your timelines will not be correct. So make sure your timelines, your event timelines on student histories are accurate. They reflect what really happened. And if you need assistance updating those, just let us know and we can help you revise your student histories to reflect the correct dates. Okay, so moving on to the district summary data page. This is data, again, that you submit directly to us. In aggregate, in most cases, there is some student level information we will need from you in certain cases, but for the most part, it's just aggregated data that you provide us based on what is going on in your district. So this page is administrator access only. You access it through the green menu bar, through the administrator drop-down, open the district summary data page. Right now, the data pages for most districts are completely empty. So there are no boxes filled, there are no zeros, there's no data there at all. We wiped that out. And it will not, we do not populate that at all. You must go in and populate that data. You can update it and save it multiple times prior to June 30th. If you want to put a little bit of information in there today and then in a couple of weeks you want to put the rest, that's completely fine. As long as it is accurate and complete on July 1, then we are happy. You can do whatever you want to in the meantime to complete that. We do ask that empty boxes be filled with zeros. So if you have not had any types of outcomes for evaluations, for example, certain types of outcomes, then you need to put a 0 in there. We cannot assume that an empty box means a 0, so an empty box means incomplete data. So please enter zeros if that is your total count for a particular event. So if you haven't had any initial evaluations this year, if you haven't had any Sooner Start referrals, you still need to complete the page and enter zeros for that data. We do flag incomplete pages as not timely and non-compliant. We had districts last year that were flagged non-compliant on indicators 11 and 12 simply because they didn't complete their district summary data pages. So you don't want to be flagged as non-compliant for missing data. So please enter those. That's best for you and best for us. Okay, so the first indicator data set we collect is indicator 11, the 45-day timeline compliance. This is a 100% compliance indicator. IDEA and OSEP require that every state be at 100% compliant on this, so we require districts to be 100% compliant. We report the count of delays and the reasons for delay in completing initial evaluations. So this is only for initials, not reevaluations, so only count your initials. There are two broad categories of delay that we report: family reasons and other reasons. This is what the data submission box looks like. It says indicator 11 at the top. That first box is the total count of referrals. And when we say total referrals, we mean total parent consents for an initial evaluation. That is a auto sum number. So the information you put into the boxes below, that 0 will change based on the numbers you enter. So if you have 3 in line 1 and 2 in line 2A, then that total would be 5. Okay. So that first line, number 1, evaluations completed within 45 school days. These are your timely initial evaluations. Enter the number there. If you had any that were not timely, you put those numbers into the next 4 boxes. So 2A and 2B are considered family reasons. So if you have a child who comes to you, you get parent consent for evaluation, perhaps you start the evaluation process, but then the student leaves for another district or another state. You would count that student consent in this box. You will never be able to finish it. It's considered untimely in a sense because you can't finish it, and therefore you would enter that number down below in 2A. You are not held liable for that. From a compliance perspective, it is considered an excused delay, but we do need those counts. If you are a district that has a student coming in to your district after the consent was signed in another district, you do not need to count that here. You are no longer liable for the 45-day timeline compliance measure. The previous district would count that referral, that consent. The new district would not. So make sure you distinguish between those. The next line, 2B, you would mark any count of evaluations that could not be completed timely because the parent failed or refused to produce the child. That would go in that box there. You can conduct an evaluation without a parent present. So just because the parent is not present does not mean you cannot complete the evaluation. So this is only if the parent failed to produce the child, not because the parent failed to attend. Okay. The next line, let me cover 2C first. This line should always be 0. So if you read that carefully, it says parent refusal to sign consent for evaluation caused delays. Well, if they never sign consent for evaluation, the timeline never starts. So this is a holdover from a previous reporting period. We need to remove it from the page, but for now, just enter a 0 there. There should never be any numbers on that line other than 0. Okay, so line D, this is where you would report the count of evaluations that were delayed for reasons other than family reasons. So all non-family reasons need to be reported here. And if you have 1 or 10, however many you have, go down below to the reasons why the evaluation was not completed and check one of those boxes or check several boxes depending on the reasons for why the evaluation was delayed. Okay, so we don't need to know counts of those, we just need to know which reasons were checked. Now, if you have any late evaluations due to non-family reasons, we also have to have a list from you, preferably in an Excel document, we have a template for this, a list of students, their STNs, and the reasons for delay. This is required information because each of those would be considered a finding of noncompliance, and we have to review those per OSEP requirements. So anytime you have a late evaluation for non-family reasons, we have to review that and ensure that the district is meeting its compliance requirements. And that if you do not submit that spreadsheet to us, you will be considered untimely and non-compliant. So please do that. The last box in this section is something that we report to OSEP. We do not collect this information or use this information ourselves, but they want to know in our annual report the maximum number of days beyond the 45th day needed to complete the most tardy evaluation in the whole state of Oklahoma. So we just provide one number for the most tardy evaluation across the whole state. But in order to collect that, we need you to tell us the number of days beyond the 45th day that you needed to complete an evaluation. So if your most tardy evaluation was 1 day late, enter 1. If it was 10 days, 20 days, etc., just enter the number of days there, and we will compare that across the state and report that to OSEP. Okay, a few notes on the 45-day timeline. Again, only count initial evaluations. Include your Sooner Start referrals in these counts if you conducted additional evaluations and got parent consent for those. So instead of just reviewing the existing information from Sooner Start, perhaps you wanted to do additional evaluations, you got consent, consider those initial evaluations and count them here. So you would count those both on the 45-day timeline and in the Part C to Part B transition set. So look at both of those. Make sure you include all disabilities. So we get this question periodically. Do I count speech evaluations under the 45-day timeline? Yes. Okay. Speech services are special education services. They have evaluations. They get parent consent. It's all part of the process. Include those for compliance reporting. And so this, again, reiterates that information. If you have any late evaluations for non-family reasons, we have to know the names and STNs of those students whose evaluations were delayed and the reason for delay. Okay. Upload that information to data test, and we'll walk through that in a moment, but each Ed Plan system has a fake data test student. We refer to it as a document sharing tool, but it's just a fake student where we can share documents between the district and the state securely and privately. Okay, so a little bit about Indicator 12. Again, this is early childhood transition and is also a 100% compliance indicator. We need to report the counts of eligibility outcomes for kiddos transitioning from Sooner Start and any reasons for delay in completing evaluations and IEPs. So there are two broad categories of delay. One is family refusal or declined services. The other, of course, is the set of other reasons. So just as for Indicator 11, family reasons are considered excused for compliance purposes. Other reasons for delay are considered non-excused for compliance reasons. So, just like the other one, if you haven't looked at the district summary data page before, it is just one long web page of information, several different tables, all connected together. The first one is Indicator 11. The second bit is CEIS, which we'll get to in a second. Then Indicator 12 follows. So for Indicator 12, the information is nearly identical to Indicator 11, but let's walk through it because some of the categories are different. But again, you have an auto sum for the total referrals from Sooner Start. So if that number does not add up to what it should be, it means that one of your boxes below does not have the correct number, so check those. The next line, line 1, you report how many kiddos came to you that you determined not eligible for special education services, and the eligibility was done timely. So line 1 is timely completion of eligibility determined not eligible. Line 2 is the number of students found eligible for Part B and everything was completed timely. So input that number there. Okay, so going back to Indicator 11, let me just interrupt myself just a bit. If we have a student who moved into our district with the REDS and parent consent and we did the evaluation, no, you do not count that as an initial referral because the consent was received elsewhere. Okay, the former district would count that. So going back to Indicator 12, parent refused consent or declined services, this is considered your family reason. So if you have a parent or if you have a child who is referred to your district, but in the process, whether at the TPC meeting or prior to or soon after, the parent decides that they no longer want to pursue Part B services, you would count that child here. They never complete the evaluation, they never complete the IFSP, so it looks like it might be untimely completion of those requirements, but instead it's that the parent declined services, so count that number here. The next line refers to one of two circumstances related to a late referral from Sooner Start. So let me walk through those because we report them differently depending on the type of circumstance. The first scenario, if you have a kiddo who is referred to Sooner Start and they have received Sooner Start services for more than 3 months, you know, maybe they've been in there for a year or 2 years, maybe 6 or 7 months prior to the 3rd birthday, but the referral comes to you within that 90-day window prior to the 3rd birthday. that is considered a late referral from Sooner Start. And you would count that at the very bottom of this box in line 5 down at the bottom where it says late referral from Sooner Start. So you would count that in line 5 up above and then check the box for line 5 down below. Districts are expected to complete the eligibility and IEPs if necessary by the 3rd birthday for any child who has been in Sooner Start for more than 3 months, essentially. Okay, you are expected to meet those timelines. Whether you agree with that or not, that is the expectation. The second scenario, let's say a student comes to Sooner Start within 3 months prior to the 3rd birthday. So they're nearly 3. They get referred to Sooner Start. Sooner Start decides that that child needs services. The family wants to pursue services with Sooner Start for just a month or 2. That leads to a late referral from Sooner Start, but it's considered a late referral to Sooner Start also. In that case, if the student comes to Sooner Start late and therefore comes to you late, you report that up here in line 4. So the number of children who were referred to Part C less than 90 days before their 3rd birthday. We do have a report that will tell you whether or not a student was referred to Sooner Start within that 90-day window. So you can check your kiddos to see if any of those fall into that category. And that is the Early Childhood Transition Report. So make sure you check that. But those 2 scenarios we do report in different places. One you would report in line 4, the next you would report in line 5. So that is the set of other reasons for delay. So if you have any IEPs not completed by the 3rd birthday and they don't fall into any of the other groups, you would report that number here. And then you have to check one of the boxes below for why that IEP was delayed or why that eligibility was delayed. Okay? So just like indicator 12, you would need to give us the list of those late evaluations and IEPs and the reasons for those. Similarly, we need to know the maximum number of days beyond the 3rd birthday for completing the IEP. So if it was 1 day past the 3rd birthday or 90 days past the 3rd birthday, just enter that maximum number of days in that box for us. And again, we just report that to OSEP. We do not use that information ourselves, but we have to report that. Okay, a few notes on EC transition. In some cases, reasons for delay will overlap between indicator 11 and indicator 12. So again, if you have a child who comes from Sooner Start and you decide you want to do an additional evaluation on the student, then you would get parent consent. It would be considered an initial evaluation. There are a few scenarios to this. One, that you may complete the evaluation within the 45-day timeline, but not meet the 3rd birthday. In that case, it would be not delayed for indicator 11, but delayed for indicator 12. Similarly, it might be the opposite. So you may not be timely for the 45-day timeline, but you may be timely for the 3rd birthday requirement. So depending on the scenario, you want to check to make sure that if you are reporting the same student in both indicators, that you check to make sure reasons for delay align or match up according to what happened on that student's circumstances. Okay. Again, that special note, if you have any that were delayed for non-family reasons, we need the list of names, STNs, and the reasons for delay. So ideally, you will upload one of the templates that we have, one of the non-compliance templates. This one's called the EC transition template, into data test so that we can see those students' information. We do have to check each of those student cases to determine compliance. So how do you find data test? So again, this is just a document sharing tool we have set up in everyone's Ed Plan system. You search for a student, it's a fake student, last name test, first name data, and you open that student's record. If you cannot find the fake student data test, it's likely because someone in your system decided that this was a crazy student, they do not really exist, why are they here, and they inactivated them. Completely understandable. However, if you need to upload information, you do need to reactivate that because we do use that to share information with districts. So you just open the document section and you upload the relevant documents by uploading an external document. Okay. This is a great tool to use anytime you need to share student level data with us. We cannot request student level information by email. That is a violation, considered a violation of FERPA. So please do not send us student level information. If you upload information to Data Test, we can see it the moment you upload it, because we can be in your system at the same time. So it's an immediate transfer of documents and student level information, and it's a great way to maintain privacy and to ensure that we're not violating any privacy laws. Okay. If you have questions about Data Test, if you're having issues with it, let us know. We are happy to walk you through how to use that. Okay, any other questions on indicator 11 or 12 before I move on to personnel? Okay, so the personnel required data, we have to report federally the count of FTEs of related services personnel and paraprofessionals who serve students on IEPs. We only report aggregated data for the whole state. We do not report district level information, and at this time we do not use this at the state level for anything. There are ideas we've thought about how to use it and how we might be able to reference that information when thinking about vacancies and district needs for personnel, but at this time we just send the information to OSEP. They ask for 11 discipline categories under related services. They do not ask for any teacher information, so it's only related service providers, fully certified and not fully certified. We also have to report counts of paras, qualified and not qualified. Paras are a little bit tricky because we report by age group. So they have a 3 to 5-year-old age group and a 6 to 21-year-old age group. So if you have a para working in a kindergarten class with both 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, you will need to count how much time they work with each set of students. Now, fortunately, you do not need to go and observe the para for a week and determine very precisely how much time they work with 5-year-olds versus 6-year-olds. You can estimate that. So maybe the division of students in the class is about 40% 5-year-olds, 60% 6-year-olds. You could report 0.4 and 0.6 as the differentiation between FTE between those two age groups. So if you have questions about that, give us a call. We'll happily work that out with you. But basically, if the class is about split half and half between 5 and 6-year-olds, then you would do 0.5 and 0.5 for those two age groups. This is what the section on personnel looks like. So the related services personnel are listed first. As you can see right now, it's completely blank, so no data is entered in here. If you do not have anyone providing these services in your district, then you need to report a 0 for that category. Okay? I'll get to the para question just submitted in a moment. Let me talk about related services personnel first. So there are 11 categories. 7 of these are pretty straightforward. So we have audiologists, SLPs, interpreters, psychologists, OTs, and PTs. And then down below in row 11 is orientation and mobility specialists. Those are fairly straightforward. They provide services almost only to special ed kids, so they're very easy to count how much time they work with students. For PE teachers, social workers, medical or nursing staff, and counselors, these are a little bit trickier. Okay, so think about and count how much time these roles, these positions, work with special education students for the purposes of meeting the needs of those students based on their disability. Perhaps written into an IEP, perhaps not. So, PE teachers, this is a very good example. Last year, we had a district report 5 PE teachers. This is a pretty high number for a district, so I gave them a call and said, hey, I just want to check on this. Do you really have 5 PE teachers that work exclusively with special education students? And the director said, well, of course not. Those are just our general PE teachers. I said, great, good to know. So how much time do they provide services based on the disabilities of the students? And she said, well, the SPED students are just integrated into the general PE classroom and they don't receive any special services. I said, great, you will report 0. So if a PE teacher does not provide any specialized services due to the needs of a student based on their disability, you would report 0 in that category. That goes for social workers, medical nursing staff, and counselors. So if your nurses are working with SPED students, because of their disability, count that time. If they're just putting Band-Aids on knees because of recess, bumps and bruises, that would not count, okay? So make sure it refers to the amount of time those staff spend based on the needs of special education students exclusively, okay? That's true for counselors too. Counselors are a little bit trickier at the secondary level. If you have counselors providing additional services to special education students because of their transition goals, you can count that time, okay? So a couple of questions here. Yes, co-ops are tricky. If you are part of a special ed co-op, you need to count both. Count the personnel that you have employed and the personnel employed by the co-op if you pay the co-op for those services. So this, you need to count anyone employed by you or on contract by your district, and that includes through co-ops. So if you pay the co-op for SLP services, their SLP works in 5 districts equally every week, maybe 1 day in each district, then you would report a 0.2 for that SLP for your district, okay? And we'll get into a couple of how to calculate that information on the next slide. But going back to the question about paras. If you have paras working in a gen ed inclusion class with both gen ed and special education students, if they're providing extra services to those special ed kids because they are in that classroom, so let's say the para would not be there if the special ed students were not there, then you would count that time. If it's a general aid to the classroom who would be there regardless of the presence of special education students, then you do not need to count that time. Great question. Okay, I think that are those questions. We are contracting out for OT and PT. You count those. If you contract, if you pay anyone, you will count the services. Okay? So, notes on calculating FTEs. Count anyone employed or on contract as of child count. So, a couple of caveats to that. If you have services being provided to students in your district that you are not paying for, so maybe the hospital is providing support therapy services, or you have a nonprofit center providing counselors. If you are not paying for that, do not count them, okay? The second caveat is count those employed by your district or on contract as of last October. So maybe in October, you had 1 SLP working in your district, and that was what you needed at the time. But this spring, you find that due to increases in your numbers of students, you need to hire a part-time SLP. Do not count the additional time of services provided by that second SLP. Only count the original who you had employed or on contract as of last October, okay? To calculate average hours, so basically what you're doing, you're calculating the percent of time. FTE is just a percent of a full-time equivalent person. So if you have someone working full-time in your district, they're there every day, all day long, you would count that service provider as a 1. If, however, and this is the case for most districts, if you have someone who's coming into to provide services on a part-time basis, you need to calculate the average hours served in one of three ways. You can do by service, you can do by school week. So if that person comes in once a week for a whole day, okay, then that would be 1 day divided by 5. That would be a 0.2 FTE. If you have someone that comes in a few hours a month, you can calculate the average per month. Let's say you have someone coming in just a few hours per year. You can calculate the average by year. You can use any of those three methods depending on how often that service provider works with your students. So you don't need to try to translate someone who comes in, just a few hours a year into a school week. That's kind of silly. So just think about the averages per week, per month, or per year, depending on how often they are in your district. Okay, and that's particularly true for psychologists or psychometrists who may only come in for evaluations once in a while. Think about that average on a yearly basis. That's perfectly fine. You may need to report what seem to be very small numbers. So if you only have a few hours per year, you're going to have something very small, a 0.02 or a 0.05, and that's okay. When we aggregate these numbers at the state level to report to OSEP, those small numbers add up across all districts. So report those. We want to know the time, even though it seems like just a little bit of time to you, because at the state level, those build on themselves across all districts. So if a service provider works even 1 hour a week, 1 hour a month, then count the hour as that percent of FTE. We want to know that. Okay. We do have an FTE calculator document. If you have a lot of folks and you're not quite sure how to calculate things, or you want some assistance, that FTE spreadsheet is a good tool to use. You can save it over from year to year and just change numbers, and then you won't have to redo all of your information on an annual basis. But if you have questions about how to use that, please give us a call. There are a couple of tricks to it that make it seem like it's not working, but it's because one piece of data is information. So let us know if you have questions about that. Okay, any other questions about personnel before I move on? Okay, so the next bit of information that's included on the district summary data page is called the CEIS Student Reporting. This is only required for districts that reserved funds for providing voluntary coordinated early intervening services during the current school year. So we only have 8 districts that did this last year. The calculator is located on our data page. We'll review those resources at the end. So Coordinated Early Intervening Services, or CEIS, is something a district can choose to do, setting aside a certain percentage, up to 15% of special education funding. If a district chooses to do that, we need to know how many students received services through that money, and over time, how many moved into special education. So that's what we are required to report at the district level. So we ask for that information through the district summary data page. Students, this is just a little bit of information for you. This is not, if you're not one of those 8 districts, then this is a little bit more information than you need. I do want to note, though, that I don't know how many of you have been paying attention to federal regulatory changes in the Department of Ed, but this is a really important one for you to know. The previous administration passed regulations to change how significant disproportionality is calculated and corrected. Okay? The current administration sought to delay that. So they put a delay on implementation in that. That was valid all last year through just a couple of months ago. So a federal court denied the delay and said that that regulation could not be delayed, so states must now implement the significant disproportionality regulations. And what that means is that any district that was identified as significantly disproportionate last November, they will be required to set aside a full 15% of special education starting next school year. Okay, so we only had 23 districts in Oklahoma that fall into that category that were significantly disproportionate. We will be contacting you if you are one of those. We'll be working with you, providing you information, webinars, and information on how to set aside, how much to set aside, what you can do with that money, how to track and monitor it, and so forth. So it will be a big change for you, but it's important to know that that is something that all states are required to do. We have to move forward implementing that because the delay no longer applies. Okay, so going back to the voluntary CEIS for this year, these are the 8 districts that have to give us student numbers. If you are not one of these districts, then you just enter zeros on your district summary data page for this section. Okay, so briefly glance at that, go, oh, this is the CEIS information. I don't need to do this, and I'll enter zeros. If you do happen to enter numbers there, and you are not one of the 8 districts, we will ignore them. So if you accidentally put information in there, we will just decide that that was just an accident, and we won't take those numbers and report those anywhere because we know you hadn't set aside. Okay. Any other questions at this point about the district summary data page? Okay. So let's move on to the student level data. Again, you need to review this. It's very important that you review this before we pull it out of EdPlan. We will pull whether or not you have looked at it. So whether you have cleaned it. So it's important that you check it to make sure it reflects accurately on your district. So the data we will pull, we pull exiting reasons, we pull secondary transition information, we pull early childhood data, outcomes at this point, we pull environments in the fall, we pull discipline information, and for comparison purposes only, we will pull information about the consent to eligibility timeline. Okay, we had districts last year that were non-compliant that didn't report non-compliance, and so we need to verify that what you are submitting to us is correct. We have a report now that we can use. It's not accurate for reporting purposes, but we can use it to check district submissions for indicators 11 and 12. Okay, so let's move on to exiting. We have to report the count of students who exited districts and their reasons for exit for ages 14 to 21. Okay, so if you look at your exit report in advanced reporting and you find some students and you think, why aren't those students there? They exited my district. Well, check how old they are because we only have to report ages 14 to 21/22 on that report. So we report the following reasons. We report dropped out and unknown. So this report does feed the dropout indicator, indicator 2. So if your dropout rate is surprising to you, you need to check your exiting report because we pull that directly from there. We report deceased students. We report students who exceeded maximum age, who exited because they graduated with a diploma, if they transferred to another school system, and we report students who return to regular ed by exiting the district through L&H or homeschooling. Okay, so homeschooling this year is no longer. Last year we had to report that as a dropout because of some Oklahoma regulations, but OSEP this year issued guidance in their measurement tables to say that students who exited district for homeschool should be considered returned to regular education. So they are giving up their special education services, and we report them as returned to regular ed. So just so you know that if you have a student leaving because of homeschooling, they are no longer considered a dropout, which is great information. If you have students who have been determined no longer eligible for special education, maybe they've met their goals, they no longer need services, whatever reason, you do not exit them from EdPlan. Okay? You keep them active in EdPlan, you just process the non-eligibility, and they will no longer show in your caseloads or on your reports as a special education student. Okay? Please don't exit them because they're still active in your district and you want them to show an ed plan as a student in your district. Okay, let's see, a few notes on this. Make sure you enter correct exit dates and exit reasons. On the exit report, you can double check your reasons and dates to make sure that they are correct. If you find one that is not correct, I want to walk you through the easy way to update that information. So you do not, we highly recommend that you do not reactivate the student and repeat the exit information correctly. Okay, you do not need to reactivate to change an exit reason. Rather, the easiest way to do it is you go to the inactive record, and at the top of that page, there's a tiny button that says Exit Info. Click on that box, and in that box, you can change the exit reason and or the date, and save that, and it will show on the student history, it will show on reports with the corrected exit information. Okay, so make sure you enter that there rather than reactivating the student. If you have questions about how to do that, let us know. I will gladly, we will gladly walk you through that. Again, unknown should be used as a temporary exit status until you know where the student has gone. If you have, so going back to homeschool, if you have a student or a family who says, yes, we're going to homeschool the student, and then they say they're going to go to EPIC, okay? EPIC, other virtual schools are considered accredited schools in Oklahoma. They are not homeschooling. So if you have a student who I don't want to even say homeschools, but decides to stay at home to attend a virtual school, that would be an exit as a transfer to another school system. So don't put homeschool for that kiddo. Make sure you transfer that student to another district. Finally, if you have students who are graduating this year, let's say they're graduating in late April or May, if they're graduating before June 30th, make sure you exit them prior to June 30th. If you wait until next year, they will not benefit your exiting information, okay, because they will be reported for next year. You do not want to wait to graduate your students who actually graduate prior to June 30th, okay? If you have a student who's in summer school, however, and they have to finish summer school, get the appropriate grades prior to graduating, then you would report them next year. If you are a K-8 school, do not exit your 8th graders as graduated. Okay, they're not graduating with a high school diploma. They are transferring to another school system. So the best process for those kiddos is just to leave them in Ed Plan, and when the new district, when they move to a new district, that district will ask for their transferred information. So they will pull over automatically over the summer. You do not need to do anything with those. You don't need to exit them at this time. And then finally, and this pertains also to the secondary transition, which we'll talk about next, but if you have kiddos who are going to graduate this spring, you want to make sure that the IEP is current at exit, okay? You do not need to refinalize an IEP prior to June 30th as long as they are graduating before the IEP is due. So, let's say you have a student who is graduating on May, 17th. Okay, that's a Friday. So they're graduating May 17th. Their IEP is due May 20th. You exit the student on the 17th. Their IEP was current at exit, so you don't need to do anything else with that IEP prior to June 30th, okay? However, let's say the student is exiting on May 17th, but the IEP is due April 30th, okay? The IEP is due 2 weeks prior. You must refinalize that IEP if they are going to continue to receive services for those last 2 weeks prior to exit, or you will be non-compliant on indicator 13, okay, which is secondary transition. So you want all of your secondary IEPs to be current at exit, okay, especially if they're graduating. That's very important. Let's see. Any other questions about exiting? Okay. Secondary transition. So this is related to that. This is one of our 100% compliance indicators. All states, all districts are expected to meet this requirement at 100%. So we have to report the percentage of students whose IEPs meet the 8 secondary transition requirements. Okay, I won't go through those here. You can read them. If you are in a high school, you should know what these are. Oklahoma uses a little bit of a workaround. So we do not look at every single IEP for reporting purposes to determine if all 8 of these requirements were met. So we just don't have the capacity to do that. We will do that at monitoring or at other times of the year, selective reviews, those kinds of things. But for the reporting purposes, we use a workaround. So as you know, for the IEP, in order to finalize an IEP for a secondary school student, you must complete all of the transition information before you can finalize. We have that rule of completion in the system. Because that rule of completion exists, if you, as long as you finalize the IEP and it is current and up to date on June 30th, then you are considered in compliance on this indicator. So what that means for your district, if you have any IEPs of secondary students who are going to be out of date on June 30th, you will be considered non-compliant on this indicator. You have to refinalize all IEPs that are due prior to June 30th. Okay, very important. So if you have an IEP that is coming due in late May, you need to be working on that now to refinalize that in a timely manner, or you will be non-compliant. Last year we had many districts that were non-compliant on Indicator 13 because of incomplete, unfinalized, out-of-date IEPs. You don't want to be in that situation, okay? It's very important that you get all of your IEPs up to date. We do have a report that you can look at in advanced reporting. It's called the Secondary Transition Report, and it's very straightforward. It will tell you the due date of the IEP and if it is due before June 30th. So make sure you look at that and check all of your IEPs. Now, naturally, every IEP is expected to be timely at all times, up to date, never out of date, never out of compliance. We know that that doesn't always happen across districts. We do not make findings of noncompliance generally throughout the year unless we need to monitor. But at the time that we pull end of year data is when we make most of those findings. So make sure everything's up to date on June 30th. Okay, any questions about secondary transition? Okay, so early childhood data. We also pull this information, and we are required to report specific learned skills outcomes of very young kids. So it's basically a pre-test versus post-test. How did students improve from the time they entered the program to the time they turned 6? So we only pull information on students who turn 6 during the fiscal year or who exit the early childhood program. So maybe they meet their goals, they no longer need speech services, something like that. We pull this information from the early childhood data collection page in the IEP process in Ed Plan. So there are 2 tabs in there. There's the EC environments and there's the COSF page, the early childhood outcome summary form. So that page, that COSF page, needs to be complete for every student who is turning 6 prior to June 30th. So if you have a kiddo with a summer birthday, you want to make sure that the outcomes information is completed before you leave school. Otherwise, you will be held liable for the incomplete information on June 30th. So a few things that we look for. Students are only reported federally if they've had at least 6 months of service. So if they come into special education, if they start receiving special education services between the ages of 3 and 5.5, they have to have their entrance ratings and the entrance date. So make sure on that COSF page, all of your little kiddos have their entrance information. If they come into the program, if they start receiving services after they turn 5.5, so maybe they're 5 years and 9 months old, you do not need to worry about entrance ratings or exit ratings. Okay, that information is not collected. We will not report it. We only report information for students who have received at least 6 months of service, and we measure that as about 181 days. Okay, so that's how we count that. So exit ratings, you need to enter your exit ratings as close to the age of 6 as possible, so that you can make sure to get as much of that 6 months of service. So if they come in close to 5.5, you want to push that entering the exit data as close to their 6th birthday as possible. If you have a student who will turn 6 after June 30th, they will be counted next fiscal year. So you can enter the data now if you want. We will not count it. Or you can enter it next fall. That's perfectly fine too. But any student who has turned or will turn 6 prior to June 30th, you need to enter the exit date and the exit ratings on the COSF form. If you have questions about what those ECO ratings should be, we have a link here on this page to a national TA center called ECTA, the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, and they have a lot of information on ECOs. We also have good information on ECOs on our data page on the state website. Okay, so just briefly, the content that's included on that form, we need all 3 outcomes, so entrance and exit ratings for each of the 3 outcomes, and whether progress was made for each of those 3 outcomes. So don't skip any ratings, don't skip any yes/nos. You will be considered incomplete in your data submission if that information is not there. Last year, so hopefully you know that we do include outcomes ratings on the determinations as part of our results-based accountability review. If a district did not complete their information for ECOs, let's say they had missing ratings on students, they were marked lower for outcomes for that measurement. So a lot of our districts didn't meet target simply because they didn't enter the data. So make sure that's not the reason you're not meeting target. If you're meeting target because you have a set of students that just struggles, that's okay. If you're not meeting target because you haven't entered data, that is something that you need to look at and make sure doesn't happen. Okay, any questions about ECOs? Okay, so for discipline, this is the last major data set that we pull at the student level at end of year. We have to report all disciplinary removals for students with IEPs between the ages of 3 and 21. Hopefully we don't have any 3-year-olds being removed for disciplinary reasons, but we know that that may happen periodically. OSEP has pretty strict reporting requirements, so we want to make sure you report a removal correctly. We have 4 types of removals to report. Do not include after-school detentions. Do not include lunch detentions. Those are not considered removals from placement. Okay. We only report in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, something called unilateral removal to interim alternative educational settings, or IAES, and removal by hearing officers. So these are 2 types of removals that are not likely to happen very often. So if you have one, you probably know it. If you're not sure if you have one of those, we do have some guidance so that you can determine whether one of those has happened. But they're not very common and in Oklahoma. Out-of-school suspensions are pretty straightforward. If you send a student home at any time during the day for disciplinary purposes, So if you call a parent and say, we need to send Johnny home, he has, broken the rules, that is considered an out-of-school suspension, whether or not you document it as that in your district. For OSEP purposes, that is an out-of-school suspension. An in-school suspension, those are trickier for most districts in Oklahoma. So a lot of districts don't count every type of disciplinary removal as a suspension, and that's okay. Despite how your district counts it or how your district defines it, if you remove a student for disciplinary reasons from their usual placement, it is considered an in-school suspension. So we call those de facto suspensions. So, for example, you send a student to the principal's office for half a day for disciplinary reasons. That is considered an in-school suspension. You send the student to the library for half a day. That is an in-school suspension. Let's say you remove a student from their standard general education setting to the special education room for disciplinary reasons. When that is not in their IEP as a behavioral support, that is an in-school suspension. Okay, whether it's for 1 hour or for half a day or 3 days, that is an in-school suspension and needs to be reported as such. So if a student is removed from their usual educational placement, from their usual setting, that is considered a suspension if it is done for disciplinary reasons. Okay. So we know that your principals may not report it as a suspension. You need to report it as a suspension in Ed Plan so that we can count those removals accurately. Now, there are a couple of caveats. Let me walk through this first. To report discipline incidents, you have 2 ways to do that. You can do it the student-by-student way. To do it one removal at a time, you open the student's record in Ed Plan and you click on Discipline Info and you start to enter the information. The first tab that will pull up asks you whether services were provided during the removal. You answer yes or no. If you answer no, you need to enter the dates. And then once you save that, it will move to this screenshot here, the drop-down menus that you see here, where you describe the removal, whether parents were notified, and other things like that. Okay? So if you only have a few removals, this is the best way to do it. It's pretty quick, student by student, enter the information one by one. If you have a lot of removals that you need to enter, maybe for the whole school year, or maybe you're a large district and you have several to enter for 1 month at a time, then you should use one of the auto-upload templates that we have. So we have 2 templates, one for services and one for removals. Complete those. They're just Excel spreadsheets. Complete those. Follow the directions. You have to meet certain requirements on that page. It has to be entered very specific ways. But if you complete that, it will auto-upload to all records that you indicate, even those records that are inactive. So if you have a student who is no longer in your district, but you need to report a removal for that student, you will have to reactivate the record. Okay, so that is something that it's a little bit time consuming, but you do need to reactivate those students who have left your district and enter the removal information. Okay, so a couple of the auto-upload templates are also on our website, and I'll show you that in a moment. Let's see. I was going to say something about... Okay, so in terms of guidance, we have 2 documents that, well, several documents that can help you with discipline. We have the templates on our website on this page here. Go to End of Year Reporting, and you can find the discipline templates. We also have a document called Discipline for Principals, so that you can share that with your principals or whoever is entering discipline information so that they know how to report special education removals correctly. And it's just a question-answer sort of flow chart that you go step by step to determine whether or not something's an in-school suspension or IAES or other types of things. So it's a very useful document. We have that same information in our end-of-year data collection manual also. That will be uploaded this week with a lot of information about the whole end-of-year process. but that discipline information is in that document also. Okay. Let's see. Any questions? Any other questions about discipline? Oh, that's what I was going to say. That's right. So if we only report federally, we only report removals that accumulate for each student, that accumulate to more than half a day. So if you have a student who has only removed 1 hour throughout the entire school year, you can choose to put that removal information into EdPlan, so you have it documented there, but we will not collect that and we will not report it. So, students who have very few removals for only a very small number of hours do not need to be reported. However, if you have a student who is removed 1 hour, was removed 1 hour in September and 2 hours in October and 1 hour in December, and it just, an hour or two every month or a couple of days every month, then that would need to be reported because that would accumulate to more than half a day total removal. So depending on the circumstances of the student, you would need to add and enter each of those removals if the total time removed throughout the year is greater than half a day. Okay, so very important to distinguish between those two cases. Okay, so moving on to certification. Superintendents must certify between July 2nd and July 16th. They certify in single sign-on on the Special Education Child Count System application. There is no certification in EdPlan because that would cost us a lot of money to develop. Instead, we keep the old system and we certify in single sign-on. Now, that's great. It doesn't cost us any money, but we do not put any data into single sign-on for end of year. So your superintendents need to know that when they go into that system, they will not find any information that they are certifying. All that they are certifying is in EdPlan. So you are responsible for sharing that information with them. You need to share reports. You need to share copies of the district summary data page. You need to supply information about discipline removals because that is what they're certifying. Because there is no data in single sign-on, the data does not freeze, as you know, in EdPlan. So when certification happens, the data may still change. So you need to make sure that the data as of July 1, that you have copies of that so that a few months later you can go back and look at it and make sure that it reflects what it was supposed to reflect. Otherwise, if you try to open those reports in September or October when you get your district data profiles, the information in EdPlan will not be what was showing and not what we pulled on July 1. So you need to make sure you pull copies of those reports. And when you pull copies of those reports, then it makes sense to share those with your superintendent at the same time. Now, yesterday one district asked, well, do we have to pull it on July 1 or can we pull it prior to that if we finalize the data and everything's good to go? That's absolutely fine. I would highly recommend, though, that you just check on July 1 that everything is what it should be, because once in a while something will change. A new student will come in with some bad data or something like that. That could change the final data that we pull on July 1. So make sure everything's accurate at that time. So what exactly are superintendents certifying? They are certifying all of this: the completeness and accuracy of these data elements. So they're certifying exit dates and reasons, early childhood outcome information, secondary transition compliance. They are certifying that all disciplinary removals have been entered and reported correctly. They are certifying your personnel FTE counts, your initial consent counts and causes for delay, and your sooner start referral counts and reasons for delay. So all of this information on this page is what you need to share with your directors and your superintendents so that they know exactly what they're certifying. We use certification as a marker for us to indicate that you and your superintendent have looked at the data and approve it. So if you certify, if your superintendent certifies the data and you haven't really looked at it, they may be certifying bad data. And once it's certified and complete, we generally do not change it except in certain circumstances, okay? Because that certification is a marker for us that you have checked it and you agree with it, okay? If certification does not happen by July 16th, we will count that as untimely submission for end of year. So make sure they get that certified. I know it can be tricky pressing your superintendents to certify within that window during the summer, but it's very important that they do so. Okay. Any questions about certification? Okay. So here's a list of our resources. These are on our Special Education Services data pages. We have a couple of pages. We have the general page, which has information on early childhood environments and outcomes, has the discipline information, has a few other things for you to access and use related to special education data. But if you click on the end of year collection link, then you will find the templates, the non-compliance templates, those Excel documents that you need to submit if you have delays, discipline uploads, and the personnel FTE calculator. So you can find all of those on that end of year collection. We will also have the end of year data collection manual on that page. We will have the slides up soon. We will have a copy of the webinar up soon so that you can listen to that again if you really, really want to. And a couple of other things for your reading pleasure and listening pleasure related to end of year. And all of that is on our website. Okay. Any other questions at this time? The auto-upload templates, those are those discipline uploads and templates on our data page. Okay, so just briefly, a little bit about advanced reporting. Hopefully all of you are in this on a regular basis. If you're not, you need to get in there to look at these reports, because what you see in the reports is what we see. And we are pulling data directly out of these reports at the state level. And this is what we use to report federally and what we use for determinations and the district data profiles. So it's very important that you check these. So to get there, you open EdPlan. At the top along the main menu page is a reporting tab. Open that and open advanced reporting. It will open a new window. It may take a little while. Sometimes it takes a while to load. But open that up and you will see a list of folders. Hopefully public folders will pop right up. Open that. Open the OK reports, then the library folder, and then the end of year folder. That end of year folder includes all of the reports that will be are useful at this time of year. Okay. So the reports that you can use that we have available to you, we have an eligibility timeline report and an early childhood transition report that are for your information only. So they may not reflect every initial consent correctly, and they probably don't reflect every early childhood transition correctly. Part of the issue is that, especially with early childhood transitions, we don't have a good way of documenting when a parent declines to proceed to Part B. It just kind of stops. So it may look like on your report that a student is out of date, their information is overdue, they're just sitting in inactive. That's okay, as long as you know that that student and that family decided not to proceed to the evaluation process for Part B. If that's the case, you just leave that alone on the report. But that's why we cannot use that report to gather data yet. We're working on trying to improve that, but for now it's for your information only. However, the exiting report, the secondary transition report, early childhood outcomes, and the discipline report we do pull, and that is what we use for federal reporting. So what you see on the main tabs of each of those reports is what we see for your district. And if that information is not correct, if you have red flags that are not corrected, if you have errors that are not corrected, then those students will not be counted, and that information will not pull to represent your district in the best light. So make sure you review those and correct any information that you need to. We do have an advanced reporting guidance manual that walks you through each of those reports, gives information on the tabs, on the columns of information, and so forth, and we are happy to walk you through them if you have questions about those. So again, these slides will be up on our website by the end of the week. We'll have a copy of the webinar on our website and some other guidance. So if you have questions over the next few weeks prior to end of year, you are welcome to contact any of us on the data team, Travis, Tristan, or me, and we're happy to answer your questions. If you happen to hear from us, then we just have questions about your data, so make sure that we can contact you, and you are free to contact us. So if you don't have any other questions, then I'm sure we will talk to you soon. Thanks very much. Glad you were able to join.